The iPad was on the counter, where my daughter-in-law always left it, screen still glowing. I'd been looking for a chicken soup recipe, the kind my mother used to make, with egg noodles and too much dill, and my reading glasses were upstairs, so I picked it up without thinking. The browser was already open, but it wasn't a recipe on the screen. It was an email. The subject line read, Holbrook of Property, Revised Timeline. I almost set it back down. I almost told myself it was nothing, just one of her work things. She managed rental units for a small property group downtown. Emails like this were probably routine. But the address in the to field wasn't one I recognized, and the words revised timeline sat in my chest like a stone. I read it. It took me 3 passes to fully understand what I was looking at. My daughter-in-law had written to someone at a firm I'd never heard of, and she was describing my house, address, the square footage, the lot size, the detached garage I hadn't used in years. She'd written that the property had been informally appraised at $740,000, that the lot next door, which I also owned, a narrow parcel I'd bought for a garden that never quite materialized, added significant development potential, and at the bottom, in the clipped, business-like tone she used when she thought she was being efficient, the current resident situation is temporary. We anticipate being in a position to discuss transfer of title within the next 6 to 8 months. Current resident situation. That was me. I was the current resident situation. I set the iPad down on the counter. I looked out the window at the yard I had raked every fall for 30 years. The oak tree my husband planted the spring we moved in, still too skinny then, now wide enough to shade the whole south side of the house. I stood very still and let the sound of the dryer running upstairs fill the kitchen. I didn't cry. I didn't say anything out loud. I just stood there and felt something I had no word for. Something quieter and colder than anger. Understanding, maybe. The particular clarity of finally seeing a thing you'd been almost seeing for a long time. My husband and I bought the house in 1989. He was a high school history teacher. I was working nights at Memorial as an RN. We scraped together a down payment over 4 years and moved in with a mattress on the floor and exactly 1 working burner on the stove. We raised our son in that house. I sat at that kitchen table with him through homework he didn't want to do and conversations he didn't want to have. My husband died 8 years ago. A heart attack on a Tuesday morning in February. No warning, no chance to prepare. I paid off what was left of the mortgage myself, working extra shifts at first, then drawing down carefully when I retired. The house was mine completely. No liens, no partners, just my name on a paid deed in a fireproof box under the bathroom sink. When my son lost his position, his startup had burned through its funding and folded in a bad quarter. I didn't hesitate. He and his wife needed somewhere to land. I told them to take the upstairs. I cleaned out the guest room, put fresh curtains up, bought a new shower caddy. I was glad to have them. The house had been quiet for 2 years by then, and I'd started to feel the silence in ways I hadn't expected. That was 3 years ago. I noticed the small things. Of course I did. I'm not a foolish woman, but I told myself stories about what they meant. My daughter-in-law started referring to the house as ours within the first few months. Just casually, the way you do when you're comfortable somewhere. We should do something about the gutters, she'd say. Or I was thinking we could finally update the downstairs bathroom. I told myself she meant it warmly. She was nesting. That was natural. My son rerouted the utility bills to his email address. Said it was easier, more organized, he'd handle the automation. I thanked him. I stopped getting the paper statements. She repainted the front door one Saturday while I was at my sister's. Burgundy. The door had been green since 1994. The particular shade of green I'd chosen the summer my son turned 7, a color I'd picked from a little fan of swatches at the hardware store while he stood next to me picking the brightest ones. I came home to Burgundy and a cheerful text. Surprise! Fresh start. I said it looked nice. It did look nice. She started keeping her work files in the den, which had been my reading room. Then came the nursery conversation, not a pregnancy, just the mention of it, the future tense of it. The way she said, "When we're ready, we'd love to turn the downstairs bedroom into a nursery." That was my bedroom. The one I'd slept in for 3 decades. She said it so matter-of-factly, the way you talk about repainting a hallway. I noticed I let it go. I was tired of the arithmetic of keeping score in my own home. After I read the email, I went back to the iPad. I shouldn't have, but something made me go further. She'd set up a folder in the Photos app. She'd labeled it Holbrook Doc. Inside were 47 photographs. Every room, every corner. The kitchen with its old tile, the bathrooms, the utility room, the detached garage with its peeling paint, the lot next door shot from multiple angles in the slanted light of early morning. She had taken them systematically the way a surveyor works, and she had dated each one. She'd started 10 months ago. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. I didn't make the soup. I put my hands around a mug of coffee that went cold, and I let the memories come in whatever order they wanted. My son at 8, standing on the back porch eating a popsicle, telling me he was going to be an inventor. My son at 16, calling me from a payphone when he'd missed his curfew by 2 hours. And I could hear in his voice that he was scared I'd be angry, and I wasn't. I was just glad he called. My son sitting across from me at this same kitchen table the night he told me his business was failing, and the way he looked at me, like a little boy again, and I took his hand and said, "We'll figure it out. Come home." He had come home, and he had brought someone who had been, for 10 months, quietly photographing my house like an acquisition target. There is a particular kind of grief that doesn't arrive with tears. It arrives with absolute stillness. You just sit there and let the truth finish settling. I got up. I went to the bathroom and moved the cleaning supplies, reached to the back of the cabinet, and took out the fireproof box. I sat on the edge of the tub and opened it. The deed was right on top, exactly where I'd put it the day the mortgage was paid off. I read my own name, the address, sole owner. I put it back. I washed my face with cold water. I called Roslyn. Roslyn had been my closest friend since we were student nurses together 40 years ago. She'd left medicine eventually, went to law school in her 40s, spent a decade as a paralegal before she opened her own small practice. She was mostly retired now, but she still handled estate work for people she knew. She picked up on the second ring and listened without interrupting, which was what she always did. When I finished, she said, "Are you sure about what you saw?" I read her the line again from memory. "The current resident situation is temporary. We anticipate being in a position to discuss transfer of title within the next 6 to 8 months. A pause. "Come in tomorrow morning," she said. "Bring the deed." I was there at 9. She made coffee in the chipped pot. She kept on the corner of her desk, and she looked at the deed, and she said, "You are the sole owner. There is no mechanism by which they can transfer this title without your voluntary signature. None." She said it the way she always said important things, slowly, clearly once. I told her what I wanted to do. She didn't flinch. She reached for her legal pad and started writing. I called Norris the next afternoon. He was a realtor I'd worked with years ago on a small estate matter, a quiet, careful man who operated 2 counties over and had no reason to be connected to anyone in my son's circle. I told him I needed a discreet listing and a fast close. He said he knew buyers who moved quickly on well-priced properties in established neighborhoods. We agreed on a number. I signed the paperwork in his office on a Thursday. The next 3 weeks moved with a strange, focused calm. My son and his wife both worked long hours. I had the mornings and the afternoons. I started in my own bedroom. I took what was mine: the photographs, my grandmother's quilt, the small oil painting my husband had given me the year we got married. I took my books, my nursing's references, the journals I'd kept since my 30s. I packed methodically, the way I'd learned to pack a patient's discharge bag, only what matters, nothing extras, no sentiment about things that are just things. Their belongings I handled carefully. I wasn't careless. I wasn't punishing anyone with disorder. I boxed everything that was theirs, labeled the boxes by room and category, wrapped the fragile things, and arranged for a climate-controlled storage unit across town. I paid 3 months in advance. I left the access code with Roslyn. I found my new place through a listing Roslyn's daughter had mentioned once in passing. A 55-plus community in a small town 40 minutes east. Not glamorous, a one-bedroom apartment with a sun porch and a view of a parking lot on one side and a strip of old-growth trees on the other. It was clean. It was quiet. It was mine. I moved on a Tuesday while they were at work. I drove 2 carloads myself and hired a small moving company for the rest. By 4 in the afternoon, my things were arranged in the new apartment, and the house on Holbrook Avenue held nothing of mine except the walls I'd painted and the garden I'd tended. I did not leave a note on the counter. Instead, I had Roslyn prepare a certified letter. It went into the mail that Tuesday evening, timed to arrive on Thursday, the day after they came home. The letter stated plainly that I had exercised my rights as sole owner of the property to list and sell it, that the transaction was complete, that their belongings were in storage and the access code was available through my attorney, and that any further communication should be directed to Roslyn's office. At the bottom, in my own handwriting beneath the typed lines, I added one sentence. I wish you well. I will not be reachable. They came home on a Wednesday. The calls started at 7:43 that evening. My son first, then my daughter-in-law, then my son again. I watched the notifications stack up on my phone and did not touch it. His voicemails arrived in descending order of composure. The first was confused. "Mom, there's a lockbox on the door. Did something happen?" The second was harder. "The neighbors are saying the house sold. What is going on? Call me right." The third was quiet in a way that was worse than shouting. "I don't understand what you've done. We had plans. You didn't even say anything." My daughter-in-law left one voicemail. It was measured and controlled, and that, more than anything, told me what I needed to know. She said she understood I must have been upset about something, that they were willing to talk it through, that she hoped I hadn't made a permanent decision based on a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. I saved all of it. I didn't respond for 3 days. On the 4th day, I texted my son one sentence. "I'll meet you Thursday at the coffee shop on Clement. 10 o'clock. I got there at 5 past. They were already seated. His hands wrapped around an untouched mug, hers flat, on the table. I had seen that posture before in hospital waiting rooms and mediation sessions and the faces of people who had prepared a version of events they intended to present. I sat down. I didn't greet them. I set my phone on the table face up, opened to the screenshot I had taken of the email the morning I found it, and turned it toward them without a word. My daughter-in-law's face shifted in a way she couldn't quite control. A tightening around the eyes, a flicker of something that might have been alarm or might have been calculation. My son looked at the screen and then at me. "That was private," she said. "So was my home," I said. He leaned forward. "Mom, that was nothing. She researches things, she thinks about options." "She photographed every room," I said. 47 photos over 10 months. She sent my square footage and lot dimensions to a developer. She wrote that the current resident situation was temporary. I let the word sit between us. Current resident, that was me. In the house I paid for, in the house your father and I brought you home to. He opened his mouth and closed it. My daughter-in-law said, carefully, "We were going to have a conversation with you. We just wanted to understand our options first." I looked at her. "You had 3 years to have a conversation. You chose to plan instead. You never gave us." I gave you a home, I said. I gave you 3 years of living rent-free while you rebuilt. I gave you the upstairs and the den, and I said nothing when you painted my door, a color I didn't choose, and photographed my house like it was already yours. I paused. I gave you time. You spent it on a timeline. My son's voice dropped to something ragged. I'm your son. Yes, I said, and I spent 30 years making sure you knew what it meant to be treated with dignity. I don't think I succeeded the way I intended. The silence that followed was the kind neither of them knew how to fill. I slid a piece of paper across the table. Rosalind had printed the storage information, the address, the unit number, the access code. Your things are there. 3 months are paid. After that, you'll need to make other arrangements. I stood. I picked up my phone. I raised you to build something of your own, I said. I didn't raise you to plan how to take mine. I walked out into the morning air. Neither of them called my name. The sun porch faces east. In the mornings, when the light comes through the old trees, it falls in strips across the floor in a way that reminds me of something I can't quite name. A summer from childhood, maybe. Or the way light moved through the hospital rooms on early shifts. I sit with my coffee and I watch it. I went back to volunteering at the hospice. I'd done it for a few years before my son moved in, and I'd stopped because the house felt too full of other people's needs to hold anymore. Now I had room again. I sit with patients who have no one, or whose family is far away, or who simply want a quiet presence at the difficult hours. I was a nurse for 35 years. I know how to be with people who are afraid. My son tried twice more. The first time was a voicemail about 6 weeks after the coffee shop. He said he was sorry, that he'd been thinking about it, that he didn't know exactly what had gone wrong, but that he missed me. He sounded tired and genuine, but at the end he said, I just wish you'd talk to me first. As if the problem had been my silence and not their planning. The second time was a letter from an attorney, brief and speculative, suggesting I had acted in bad faith by selling while they were in residence. Rosalind wrote back in 2 paragraphs explaining, with citations, why that argument had no legal standing. We didn't hear anything after that. I didn't grieve the house the way I thought I would. I had expected to miss it the way you miss a person, specifically, sharply, in the middle of ordinary moments. But what I missed was more like an idea I'd held for too long about what the house meant. Family gathered around the old table. A son who remembered what I had given him, a life that would pay me back in the ordinary currency of being known. I had confused the house for that. The house was never that. The house was just a house. One afternoon in late autumn, I drove past the old neighborhood. Not to look exactly. I had an errand on the other side of town, and the route took me near the street. I slowed without meaning to. Someone had put a new planter box under the front window. The burgundy door was now a soft gray. There were children's bikes leaned against the fence. The oak tree my husband planted had dropped half its leaves across the lawn. The same gold and rust it always turned in October, reliable as anything I'd ever known. I kept driving. There are losses that are wounds, and there are losses that are simply the truth arriving late. Somewhere along the way, I had taught my son that the people who love you most will absorb whatever you ask of them without complaint. Maybe I should have said no earlier, said it louder, said it before it cost either of us this much. I didn't know. I was done trying to figure out where the line was between my failure and his. What I knew was this. I was 63 years old. I had a sun porch and a bird feeder and a good view of old trees. I had Rosalind, who made coffee in a chipped pot and listened without interrupting. I had patients who needed someone to sit with them through the frightening parts. I had mornings that belonged entirely to me. I hadn't lost my son. I had lost the version of him I'd chosen to believe in long after the evidence said otherwise. And what I found in the space that opened when I finally stopped pretending, that was quieter than I expected. But it was real, and it was mine. And for the first time in a very long time, so was I.